Nearly every town on the border at that particular stage, once you were south of the border, they absolutely hated the ordinary soldier. And listen, it's a known fact. If you talk to any soldier of my vintage, well, we were sent up there on monthly basis, and that was the scenario. This was our first time ever to be involved in a mission like this. Were we properly equipped? No. Were we properly trained for such a mission? No. That's just how disorganized it was. We didn't know who was who. There were people just walking across the field with Uzis hanging out.
It's now 13 hours since Mr. Tidey went missing, and still there's been no contact from the kidnappers. Mr. Tidey, a 49-year-old widower, lives in the foothills of the Dublin mountains, where he was abducted as he left home this morning.
Don Tidey was the chief executive of Ireland's largest supermarket chain, Quinsworth. He was British, but had lived in Ireland since 1968. When his wife died from leukemia, Tidey brought up their 3 children alone. Then, on the 24th of November 1983, he was suddenly snatched from them.
Don Tidey stopped at what seemed to be a routine Garda roadblock as he left home to drive his daughter Susan to school. Armed men pulled him from his car, thrust him into another and drove away, leaving his daughter bewildered by the roadside. It was a precise and tightly controlled operation.
This was 1980s Ireland, and for Gardaí, there were clear suspects.
I think it was accepted fairly early on that this was an IRA job from the top down, and I suppose that gave it much greater potency, politically and otherwise.
The massive search operation for Mr. Don Tidey and his kidnappers is being organised from the incident room here at Rathfarnham Garda station. It's believed to be the biggest operation of its kind.
Brendan O'Brien, former journalist, RTE. They were searching all over the country. They were searching houses, they were looking for information, they were appealing for information. So it was no easy task.
A nationwide search followed. 2 of the cars used in the kidnapping were later found abandoned in Maynooth. One of them had been hired in Tralee. This directed the search for the gang southwards.
After 9 days, Gardaí still had few leads, and Don Tidey's bosses at Quinsworth turned to their own shoppers for help.
It is now over a week since our chairman, Don Tidey, was abducted. If anybody who is watching now knows anything, I appeal to them to pass this information on to the manager of your store or your local Garda station.
Don Tidey's children also appealed directly to the kidnappers.
Were you aware that he might be a target?
It's always been a possibility, and it's obviously been talked about in a very relaxed way on and off. But again, you never think it's going to be your father.
We want to know that our father is well and fit now. And if my father could contact us, or the kidnappers could contact us, and give us some proof that he is.
At last, the kidnappers did get in touch and made an audacious demand for the release of Don Tidey.
A ransom of £5 million has been demanded for his safe return by the Provisional IRA. Both the British and Irish governments totally oppose ransom payments.
It was quickly made clear the ransom would not be paid. Instead, Gardaí would have to rescue Tidey themselves. New intelligence led them to an IRA heartland near the border.
There was a senior policeman in the Cavan Monaghan area, J.J. McNally, who had very good connections and had a very strong track record in this kind of subject of the IRA activity, cross-border, all of that kind of stuff. And some suspicious activity in the Ballinamoor area had been spotted by his men, enough for the Gardaí to concentrate their efforts on that area.
Ballinamore is a vast, densely forested wilderness, crisscrossed with country lanes. Don Tidey could have been anywhere.
It was always a likelihood that the kidnappers would have the advantage. These people knew those routeways, and the longer that they were in the IRA, the more they knew of them, because they'd been smuggling weapons across the border. They were used to dealing with that kind of terrain.
Gardaí needed help. And for the first time, on such a scale in Irish history, they planned a major joint operation with the Irish Army.
This barracks predominantly was involved in the service and the maintenance of troops for the Ballinamore saga. And for the first surge of that, all of the troops would have come from this location.
The Army assigned 2 full battalions to help the Garda search.
PJ Higgins, or Patrick John Higgins. My rank was Sergeant Major in Custom Barracks at Athlone. There has never been another operation of that scale with the Guards. We were 120 strong, so that we had 3 full platoons, which would be 6 sections. We were given coordinates of various woods from which we had to search. And you search that wood with your section of men and 2 guards, and then the armed detectives were there.
It was highly unusual for the Gardaí and the Army to attempt a massive liaison operation of that kind. They had soldiers who'd been out in the Lebanon, who'd been in the line of fire, cooperating with the Gardaí, some of whom were still recruits.
500 soldiers and more than 100 Gardaí passed a chilly day, combing the bare and windy vastness of Leitrim. The operation began yesterday and has also covered parts of Cavan, but the search has centred on the Leitrim village of Ballinamore.
It wasn't just the landscape around Ballinamore that made the search challenging.
This is an area which has a long history of connections with IRA activity down the year back into the 1920s. There was a small enough group in the area who had what you might call a sneaking regard for what the IRA were doing.
I am confident that there are a number of people in this area who would give help and aid to those men.
And do you think that they might have some public support? After all, they have had electoral public support.
They have no public support. Their support is very, very limited. But as I said, there are people in this area who would give help and aid to them.
If you live down south, you're not fully aware and you don't appreciate the bitterness of what was going on up there. It was an eye-opener. Really, I was shocked at the bitterness of the local people and the names that we were being called.
But for a soldier in the Irish Army, this reception was common in Ireland's border towns.
I often remember going up to the All-Ireland Fleadh in 1977, up to a place called Fortinree. It was on in Buncrana. We were travelling in trucks, and the local people were firing tomatoes at us going through, rotten tomatoes at us going through. Now, these were Irish Republicans, as they say. It was a rude awakening.
Hundreds of army troops were sent to Ballinamore from custom barracks in Athlone. One of them was Private Patrick Kelly, friend and mentor to PJ Higgins.
This barracks here is part of my life. I joined the army in February of 1976. One of the first people that used to mentor me was Paddy Kelly, because he lived in Moat the very same as I did. And he was a private soldier, and we used to be lined up here. There used to be 3 platoons in train at the time. And every so often, Paddy said to me, "Keep the head down, young Higgins. Keep yourself shaved and keep yourself clean," he says, "and we'll get through this." My first memory of meeting Paddy actually wasn't in military terms. It was in Moat when he used to sow the garden out beside the house, and he brought the plants down to the local horse show. And they won the carrots and parsnips. And because times were poor, we used to line up at the end of the show, and Paddy gave me the carrots and parsnips to bring home to the parents, and that's how I came to know Paddy.
My name is David Kelly. I'm a son of Army Private Patrick Kelly. Óglaigh na hÉireann Defence Forces Ireland. I have here, it's very poignant, it's a letter my father wrote only a week before he was killed in Dorada Wood. And it's actually a letter he sent to his own brother who was serving in Lebanon at the time. One section of the letter says, there was a lad kidnapped 10 days ago and we are looking for him and no trace of him. So I would say that we were doing lots of duty over the Christmas. It just captures that moment in time just before he is sent up to Ballinamore. Originally, he wasn't meant to be part of the search party. He had to fill in for someone. It means a lot to me to be able to read his thoughts and even to look at his handwriting, and just it's all about getting to know him better as a man and as a soldier, because I grew up without him.
On the 15th of December, Paddy Kelly prepared to join the latest Irish Army mission.
I met Paddy that Thursday evening around 8 o'clock here at the very bottom of the new block here. And I said to Paddy, oh, what are you doing here? It's 8 o'clock. He said, Gosson, I'm going to Ballinamore tomorrow.
Also being rushed to Ballinamore were hundreds of Gardaí, including 50 Garda recruits. Young men, all still in training. Among them was 23-year-old Gary Sheehan, friend and colleague to Cyril Meehan.
In 1983, I was a recruit Garda down in the Garda College, the training centre as it was called then, in Tipperary. I met Gary by chance because I found it difficult to study at night time because the prefabricated building we were in was noisy. And I went and I sought out this office that wasn't locked at night. Gary was in there, and I got to know Gary, and we had a lot in common. His father was a member of An Garda Síochána serving at the time, as was mine. He had a great interest in travel and had travelled somewhat, and I was fascinated about that. Gary was a very even-tempered individual. He was soft-spoken, very mature and level-headed, and just an easy guy to get to know and to like.
Army Private Paddy Kelly and Garda recruit Gary Sheehan had never met, but now they both headed to Ballinamore to take on the IRA.
This is Ballinamore, and this is the general area where the search was held. And as we look out to the left here, this is more or less what we were looking at. There was no new houses, no new roads. This was all dirt tracks. I was only 23 at that particular stage, and listen, I was a very, very young soldier in soldier terms. I was 7 years a soldier at that stage, and this was all new to us.
Among the search team were new Garda recruit Gary Sheehan and Army Private Patrick Kelly. Newly acquainted, they were now deployed side by side into the forest.
The conditions were horrendous. It was in the middle of December, so it was teeming rain. We had no wet gear. Once you went into the wood, you could see nothing. After you were in there 5 foot, it just became one black haze because you were actually bent down on your knees at all times. You couldn't stand up. And every time you took a pace, your foot actually sank. It was like being on the ball. You may not see another human until you come out the far side of the wood.
Brendan O'Brien was sent to cover the story for RTE's Today Tonight.
I was in Ballinamore in Dorada Woods, which is where all of this was happening.
The Garda Technical Bureau are continuing their forensic investigation here in Dorada Wood.
What I remember most is the nitty-gritty of the terrain, the physical torture that was involved in that search will stay with me. You know, mid-December, the brambles, the laneways, the loss of visibility up ahead. I'm not claiming to have been in amongst the search party because I wouldn't have been let do that. But whereas I'm a reporter breaking my way through brambles to get a kind of an atmosphere and a feeling for what it was, these guys had their lives on the line.
There had been no joint training for such activities between the Gardaí and the army. Tactics, communications, and personnel got easily confused.
We didn't know who was who. The clothes we were wearing was substandard, and it was chronic. It was something that, you know, that you wouldn't see in a cartoon film, really.
Hundreds of men were searching the Ballinamore wilderness. Gary Sheehan and Patrick Kelly crept through the woodland. Suddenly, up ahead, they spotted someone. But was it a soldier, a Garda, or a member of the IRA?
My father and his army colleague heard Gary Sheehan say those words, there's a man here and he won't speak to us.
Of course, it was an IRA activist, one of those involved in the kidnapping. And immediately, gunfire started.
Garda Sheehan took bullets to his head. He received extensive head injuries and he died instantly. My father received multiple bullet wounds from his ankles all the way up to his head. I was later told that my father didn't die straight away, and his colleagues could actually hear him in pain, as he slowly bled to death in the wood that day, which was very difficult to hear.
His last words to his comrade was, "Please don't leave me. I'm not going to make it." This guy was an absolute gentleman. He was everything that you would want your son or daughter to be. And so it was horrendous.
The Sheehan family have been in the Gardaí almost since the foundation of the state. Grandfather, father, and now the son who has so tragically been killed in this particular security operation.
The evening it happened, I was probably one of the last people to know in the training centre that he had been shot. So it came as an awful shock. Everybody was numb, and as I've always said, on that night we went from being immature sort of young men to being very sobered up. We had to grow up very, very quickly.
Patrick Kelly and Gary Sheehan had given their lives not just to discover the IRA gang, but to find and rescue the hostage.
They had found where Tidey was being held, but in the melee, the IRA guys got away, and Don Tidey managed to free himself. Now, he had been held in a low tent-like structure with a big plastic covering, handcuffed for most of the time, blindfolded, you know, pretty dire. He had been held for 23 days, and it's a near miracle that Don Tidey got out of all of that alive.
You shoot him with that, did you?
I wish I did.
Later, at Cavan Garda Station, Chief Superintendent McNally told of events as he knew them.
It has been marvellous to recover Mr. Tidey uninjured, but unfortunately, our success has been saddened by the death of two very brave young men who died in the hail of fire outside Ballinamore today.
When we first heard the news today, we heard the good news. And then came the bad news. It has been very shattering for everybody.
Suddenly, the search for Don Tidey and his kidnappers had become a case of double capital murder. The forensic squad was called in to examine the scene of the killings.
Edwin Handcock and the Detective Inspector in the Garda Ballistics Section, Garda Technical Bureau. When I joined, we had to do numerous training courses. I trained with the FBI in Quantico, and I joined the Institute for Bomb Technicians and Investigators as well. I got the call from the administration section to get up there as quickly as possible. It's a day you could never forget. I don't think any of us who were there that day could forget it. It sticks with you forever. The Garda Síochána is really like a big family, and it's the same with the Army. And when one of us is killed or seriously injured like that, we all feel the pain. All the time we realise that Gary Sheehan had a family mourning, and that Private Kelly had a wife and young children at home mourning as well. When I walked in, there was a bank, and sitting up in this bank was a dead soldier, Private Kelly. And he was sitting there with his back up against a tree. And his flak jacket was on, but it was open. And his beret was on the ground beside him. And 12 feet from him, over to one side, lay the body of recruit Garda Gary Sheehan. And he was in full uniform, wearing his raincoat. His cap was on the back of his head with the chin strap underneath his chin. My next duty then was to wrap the two bodies in forensic plastic body sheets. And assisted by members of the Garda and indeed the Army, we carried the bodies one by one down to an ambulance on the roadway. Some of the soldiers were helping to carry the body of Private Kelly out as well. I thought that was a very sad moment, to actually see the Army carrying their colleague down.
Army and Garda colleagues of the murdered men were hit hard by their loss.
One of the duties, besides carrying Gary's coffin, was that I had to stand as a part of a guard of honour around his coffin in the morgue before he was taken to the church in Carrickmacross. And it was very emotional when his family came in, his mother and father and brothers and sisters, and I had to stand there motionless, and I regret I didn't break rank and go over and give them a hug and tell them how great their son was and how proud he was of his parents and his brothers and sisters, you know. And yet, part of me says it was good for the family to see that he wasn't being left alone, that he was with one of his colleagues.
We were very naive, because I think it's fair to say it now, as we left the square that Monday morning, none of us would ever have believed that we would bury one of our own the following Monday, because we always felt we were safe. Foolishly, we felt that they wouldn't have killed a soldier.
The operation to rescue Don Tidey now transformed into a hunt for IRA killers. The kidnap was the most recent in a decade-long series of kidnaps, all designed to raise cash for the IRA's campaign.
Tom Clonan is my name. I retired from the Irish Defence Forces as a captain in 2000. All terror organisations, whether it be the Provisional IRA or Islamic State or whoever, they need cash. That's what keeps their operations running.
In February 1983, the kidnap of the racehorse Shergar was believed to be a series of 3 IRA planned ransom bids.
It had been a pretty hectic year for attempted kidnappings, because a few months previously we had the attempt on Galen Weston down in Roundhouse. I was also at that scene.
An abortive attempt was made to kidnap Canadian businessman Galen Weston, but the Gardaí were there in advance. A shootout followed and 5 men were jailed.
I think the big thing for us was the willingness of both sides to start shooting at each other. It was an indication that bad days were coming and the danger was there.
It followed on from a pattern of kidnappings and attempted kidnappings of high wealth individuals. So Ben Dunn had been kidnapped a couple of years previously.
They'd kidnapped Tida Herma in Limerick, a Dutch industrialist there. They didn't get a ransom.
I would have been aware of the kidnap and murder of Thomas Niedermayer. He was running the Grundig plant in Belfast, and he didn't survive that kidnapping. So it was a particular time in the 80s where these things were not that unusual. And I'm sorry to say, but if you take somebody out to the lonely country road and execute them in the news cycle, that's a 24-hour, maybe 48-hour event maximum. But if you kidnap somebody, and as is the case with Don Tidey, you know, hold them for 3 weeks, that's a huge rolling news story, and it attracts the international press.
But the media spotlight was not just on the IRA. Questions were asked of the Army and Gardaí about why their search was so chaotic.
It was a successful operation in the sense that the captive was rescued alive. But unfortunately, Private Kelly and Recruit Garda Sheehan lost their lives. So in that sense, of course, it was a disaster. I'm Conor Brady, and I'm a former editor of the Irish Times, but I am also a historian of Irish policing. Talking to people who were there, they did not know what they were going to encounter. They anticipated possibly picking up a trace, but they did not know with certainty that there was anybody in there. They certainly didn't know that they were going to meet a well-armed group of trained paramilitaries at platoon strength, armed with semi-automatic weapons. If they had any inkling of that, the line that went in to sweep the wood would not have been Recruit Gardaí. It would not have been our regular army. It would have been Rangers. They probably would have brought in armoured support.
There was no coherent inner cordon. The Guards and Army were completely mixed up. When they did actually come across Don Tidey, who actually ran into one of the search teams, they actually thought he was one of the members of the Provisional IRA. A gun was held to his head until he identified himself. They were then attacked by the terrorists, who opened fire and injured one of the guards by shooting him in the legs. Troops that operate together should train together. They shouldn't be unknown to one another, and that was the case. You know, a mix of Garda trainees, private soldiers, local guards, guards from elsewhere, senior officers and Garda inspectors. That was not a recipe for success. But the active service unit that was involved, the terrorists, they were extremely organised.
They were prepared, they were trained, they had exit routes, they were prepared to kill. We come up here prepared to search. As a military man, although I hate what they've done, I admire their planning and preparation because it was second to none. They executed their exit movements in a professional manner.
They moved out of the area and then used what's called fire and manoeuvre. One of them would stand and open fire whilst the others managed to move forward maybe 10, 15, 20 metres at a time. And these are classic escape and evasion techniques that are used by trained soldiers and special forces. So the Provisional IRA were very organised on the day and had a plan to get themselves out of the area, whereas the picture on the part of the Guards and the Army at the time was very, very confused.
But Don Tidey survived the confusion and returned to his family.
How are you feeling, Mr. Tidey?
I might ask you, how do I look?
Great! Great. How do you feel, though?
I feel perfectly physically fit and well. However, I personally feel the utmost sadness for the parents and relatives of those who have died.
That's lovely. And I think so.
It had a very strong impact. It changed my outlook on how I dealt with the IRA after that, throughout my career. And it focused me, to put it mildly, against my adversaries and how I dealt with them. And it was trying to balance the book, but that wasn't possible. There was nothing going to balance the book for what had happened to Gary and to Patrick.
Is this your first time here?
Yes, this is my first time here, and after 38 years.
This is the area and the exact spot where your father spent his last few moments. And if you look up into that wood there,
yes,
them small little trees, all the trees where Paddy met his final moments have all been taken down, and these have all been regrown.
For me, it's so strange to be here. This place is seared in my memory. I've thought about the Garda Wood for many years, how it affected my mother, how grief-stricken she was. You know, she lost her happiness. Happiness in our family went out the window. The following Friday, my mother would receive a letter from Don Tidey, and this is it here, commiserating with my mother over the loss of her husband. One line that stands out for me is when he says to my mother, "I honour the life that has been given. God will bless and keep you." We had the funeral, it was actually a state funeral, the following Monday.
Public representatives paid their respects to the first Irish soldier killed on active service in his own country since the Civil War.
I remember seeing President Hillary sitting by the altar, and I distinctly remember the tricolour of my father's coffin and his beret. A key thing is I never got to say goodbye to him. It was very hard just to see the coffin passing by. You know, he was gone from our lives.
There was hardly a higher pitch of emotion in the country. It was just a terrible human tragedy. All the main political figures, the president, they were all there. But it was the public attention on the family, on the faces, at a time when, you know, television was it, so to speak, you know. It was just one of those enormous events that got huge public and political attention. And there was enormous, long-lasting sympathy for the families. The late 70s, early 80s was quite a politically turbulent time, really, because there wasn't one settled administration in Dublin. The North was going through a continuing conflict.
People forget what Ireland was like at the time. You know, we had a major economic problem. The World Bank was going to foreclose on our national debt. We had mass emigration. But we also had a really serious security problem on the island, namely in the Provisional IRA and other groups.
In some ways, it was a very dark time. You'd had a series of kidnappings, a series of violent deaths, a series of assassinations.
We knew in the background there was that unusual thing as a European country that we had a major threat from terrorism on the islands.
Key members of the IRA Army Council wanted to scale up the military campaign.
From an IRA perspective, they felt they needed some big successes to gain attention of the British government in particular and world opinion.
Well, I was just sitting down in the rocks down there and the boat had turned around towards me and I was just watching it and I knew it was Lord Mountbatten's boat. The next thing, everything was spewing up into the air.
In 1979, the IRA succeeded in assassinating Lord Mountbatten off the coast of Sligo. He was a relation to the British royal family, and that was a massive attack, particularly on Irish soil.
With no political end to the troubles in sight, Northern Ireland became an increasingly militarized zone. And the effects were felt across the entire island.
At one point in the 1980s, there were 20,000 RUC full and part-time, 20,000 Ulster Defence Regiment members full and part-time, and 20,000 British soldiers in Northern Ireland, 60,000. At one point, there was one armed individual for every 7 civilians in South Armagh. It was a very militarised state, and I think members of the Provisional IRA and other groups became brutalised in that environment and were very disinhibited in terms of the use of force.
Things changed dramatically because we're dealing with subversive organisations and paramilitaries. They were using different types of weapons, heavy weapons.
At the same time, the IRA continued to apply political pressure on the British government by whatever means possible.
You had the hunger strikes, which started in 1980. 10 men died as a result, and it yielded enormous publicity.
In the immediate aftermath of the hunger strikes and that particular build-up of bitterness that happened at that time, I think the feeling grew within the provisional movement. Look, the rules are there, we'll keep them, but if we have to break them, we will break them.
Those rules had been broken in Ballinamore. Now the Gardaí and the army were determined to track down the men who had killed two of their own and intensified their search for the IRA gang responsible.
The hunt for Don Tidey's kidnappers and the killers of a Garda recruit and army private has been described as the biggest combined Garda army operation in the history of the state. Up to 1,000 army personnel giving search and firepower backing to the Gardaí.
The search continued to focus on Ballinamore. Hundreds of reinforcements arrived in the area, but many believed they were too late.
For weeks after that, we were chasing our tail, I suppose, examining suspect houses, suspect cars, hay sheds, farmyards, horse boxes, you name it. The area that we were mostly tied down to was the immediate area and up to maybe 15, 20 miles around that area. Local Gardaí kept nominating suspicious men, suspicious people seen in suspicious places, and these all had to be checked out.
The searches led to nothing.
I'd say within a few hours, Paddy's killers had departed Ballinamore, so we were guarding nothing or protecting nothing at that particular stage. That's my opinion now.
It's all a wild goose chase. The gang were gone and that was it. It was quite a disaster from our perspective. We had two colleagues killed, one from the Garda, one from the army, and the IRA gang got away.
It was the second time the IRA gang had slipped from Gardaí, and though the huge search around Ballinamore continued, it led nowhere. Until suddenly, Gardaí uncovered a fresh lead. It took them 60 miles away to Claremorris, County Mayo.
A specialist Garda unit felt that they had tracked down an IRA group who had been involved in the Don Tidey kidnap.
The three men thought to be members of an IRA gang had been sheltering in this new house along a lonely road on the outskirts of Claremorris. Around 5:30 yesterday evening, 10 members of the Garda force, including armed detectives, drove up.
In the end, the specialist unit surrounded the house, so to speak, and felt they had the men ready to be captured.
Gardaí were certain the killers were inside the house. As armed detectives approached, they were determined that this time there would be no surprises.
As they made their preparations to check out the building, the three men raced out the front door and fled into an adjoining field. One warning shot was fired over their heads, but they kept going and escaped.
When the full story is finally told, the escape by armed men from a house in Claremorris, surrounded by armed Gardaí, will prove to be the most extraordinary. Gardaí actually knew that those in the house were some of the kidnappers of Don Tidey.
In the heel of the hunt, the men escaped. They put up checkpoints all over the place. It turned out the men who were there were quite skilled, it has to be said, and they didn't use any roads in escaping. They escaped over fields in the dead of night and therefore evaded the checkpoints.
The best chance to capture one of the armed gangs that have been very active over the past week fell to the Garda party first approaching the house, and that was lost. I asked the officer in charge of a follow-up search operation about last night's events. Are you disappointed that the fugitives were able to run out the front door past the men and into an open field and escape at 5:30 in the evening?
Well, of course, we're not naturally disappointed that they weren't caught there and then, but I don't think you should describe it that they ran through the men. As I say, they ran as our men approached.
But they ran out the front door.
They ran out the front door as our men were approaching from the sides, on the road.
And the field they ran into was actually an open field. It's not one of the
Yes, but this was in darkness, remember.
It unfortunately added to a perception that the Garda search operations were less than perfect, that they'd got them in a house, and they'd got away.
For Gardaí, this was another failure in a string of disastrous operations, and the last chance they'd have to catch the IRA gang. The entire Don Tidey episode led to significant change in Army and Garda tactics.
There was a step change in the way that the Irish Defence Forces operated in providing armed support to An Garda Síochána. The expectation was that you could expect to be fired upon, you could expect the threat to use lethal force. And so that was a very important cultural shift within the organisation, and a similar cultural transformation took place within An Garda Síochána. So the development of the emergency response unit, and now armed support units travelling around Garda districts and providing support to uniformed unarmed officers. So there was a major sea change in the late 1980s.
There was a lot of movement towards reform at that time, and training was improved, equipment was improved, and there was a general move towards professionalisation.
In 1987, for example, 4 years after the Dorada Wood incident, the Army was involved in an operation in support of An Garda Síochána to detain Desi O'Hare, who was known as the Border Fox, again in another kidnapping incident. And that culminated in an incident where Desi O'Hare encountered a Garda Army checkpoint, and the responses on that day were very decisive.
It was late last night when the body of Martin Bryan was removed from the shootout scene. And at the scene, the gun used by the dead man to try to shoot his way through an armed roadblock in the green BMW with Desi O'Hare at the wheel. The soldiers shouted to uniformed Gardaí to get down, and it was Army gunfire which riddled the oncoming car, killing Bryan and seriously injuring O'Hare.
So in terms of advance to contact, our thinking, our training, our operations and our execution in both the Defence Forces and An Garda Síochána are completely transformed.
In kidnapping Don Tidey, the IRA hoped to raise funds and to raise support for their cause. Instead, there was a public backlash with unexpected political repercussions.
There was massive public sympathy for the families of the two dead men. It was enormous. It was outrage. The effect of that within the IRA was that it enhanced the division there was over what direction they should take their campaign. And what you might call the Adams Group was able to point to this series of kidnappings as entirely negative to any chance of gaining public or political support. In a rather grotesque kind of way, the killings of those two men, in the end, had a positive effect on the peace process as it emerged. What it did was, it marked a turning point in terms of the Falls Road think tank around Gerry Adams to invest, so to speak, in politics. That gained a momentum. And the Irish government wanted to have more cooperation with the British. So what happened in Ballinamore accelerated, shall we say, the connection, the contacts between the two governments.
Yet still, no one was brought to justice for the murder of Gary Sheehan and Patrick Kelly. And in 2011, David Kelly confronted Martin McGuinness in person as he campaigned to become President of Ireland.
Martin McGuinness crossed the River Shannon in Athlone to meet voters face-to-face in the presidential election campaign.
I didn't want my father and Gary Sheehan just to be like a footnote in the history books. I was determined to be a voice for my father and to try and hold someone accountable. I was aware that Martin McGuinness was running for the presidency in 2011. The presidency of Ireland includes the title of Supreme Commander of the Defence Forces, and I believed that he could have information regarding a member of the Defence Forces who had been murdered in the line of duty.
I want justice for my father.
Absolutely.
I believe that you know the names of the killers of my father.
No, I don't.
And I want you to tell me who they are.
I don't know their names.
You were on the Army Council of the IRA.
That's not true.
Yes, you were.
No? Well, how do you know that? Well,
You're a liar.
No, well, I'm not a liar.
You are a liar, yeah.
I'm not a liar.
I want justice for my father. I want you to get your comrades who committed this crime, hand themselves into the Gardaí. I'd just like to say to you, before there can be any reconciliation in this country, there has to be truth.
Absolutely. And we have proposed that there should be an international independent commission on truth.
I want truth now, today.
Yeah, okay, I appreciate
Murder is murder.
As to whether any of the main players in the kidnapping will ever be caught and brought to trial, my own guess is that it won't happen. For a number of reasons. Number one, it's a long time after the event. Number two, the Good Friday Agreement allowed for the release of prisoners who had subscribed to the peace process. My guess is that there won't be any more men charged, and it's over, except for the memory.
You'd imagine that after 40 years, we'd have some finality to all of this. But I know out there walking free and easy are the people that killed Paddy Kelly. And we, as a nation, have not done anything to correct that situation. And that to me is hard.
Getting to know Gary has definitely made me, throughout my life since, appreciate being alive, and that, you know, when good things happen, I often think, you know, I'm lucky. But poor Gary and Pat didn't get, you know, to have these milestone life events. So it was a tragedy. It was just a tragedy. Young life wasted totally unnecessarily.
After his rescue, Don Tidey returned to normal life, raising his family and pursuing his career. He still lives in Ireland. Mr. Tidey has often expressed his gratitude for the sacrifice made by Private Patrick Kelly and Garda Gary Sheehan. He attends their commemorative ceremonies and meets their families who lost so much in Ballinamore.
We are in the Moat Memorial Garden. It was created to mark the centenary of the 1916 Easter Rising. Also included in this memorial garden is a plaque in remembrance of my own father, to mark his sacrifice for his community and his country. We will never forget his sacrifice, and we're remembering those who gave their all so that we can live in a peaceful democracy.
In September 2021, Garda recruit Gary Sheehan was posthumously awarded the Garda Síochána Scott Medal in recognition of his act of personal bravery.